Okay, we're recording. Tonight we are working on module 14. Let me get over here. So we have 14, 15, and 16 this week. So 14 is hacking web applications. So we're going to summarize web application concepts, demonstrate web application threats, explain web application hacking methodology, explain web API, webhooks, and web shell, and then a nice summary of all the stuff we're going to go over. Now, as I've talked about before, when I've talked about these, I have a lot of experience with web applications and web servers. So if you have a question, I probably can answer it. And if I can't, I can at least research it and get back to you. Okay, introduction to web applications. So web applications provide an interface between end users and web servers through a set of web pages that are generated at the server end or contain script code to be executed dynamically within the client web browser. Though the web application enforce, sorry, and I have a dry throat today. Web applications enforce certain security policies. They are vulnerable to various attacks such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and session hijacking. Web services. A web service is an application or software that is deployed over the internet and uses standard messaging protocols like SOAP, UDDI, WSDL, and REST to enable communication between applications developed for different platforms. Yes, Mike.
So I have a question about the whole SOAP web services. You might not be able to answer this, and if not, it's okay. We use that ticketing system at my work, and every so often we will get a SOAP error. Is that what's pertaining to?
I'm not altogether sure. Do you get the error codes as it ever pop up?
Yeah.
If you want to, you can DM me with some of it. And I have a whole bunch of friends that work in web app and different development, and I might be able to help you. So,
Okay. Yeah, 'cause
uh,
usually when that happens, it actually like, locks us out of the ticketing system completely. And so we just say, hey, I got soaked.
All
that
it's
my
telling
guess
you,
is, since it's XML, whoever originally designed whatever it was that you're using, my guess is there is something wrong in that. And they just decided, hey, we're going to deal with the error messages rather than redesign it. I've seen that happen a lot. So that is a definite possibility.
like German said, all I was going to say is it's not an error with the system. It's an error telling you need to bathe.
But yes, so yep, that's SOAP web services, and then there's RESTful. This one is based on a set of constraints using underlying HTTP concepts to improve performance. So it depends on your whatever you're using. This one's XML, this one's HTTP. So yeah, if you've got a really, really old legacy system like that, my guess is there is some piece of code or something that is broken that is popping that error message, and they just realize that it's something that they realized to go in and fix it would actually cause more breakage, or they just don't want to trace it down. That's usually what happens. Vulnerability stack. Okay, now I love this slide because nice and colorful, and it's a really good one for like keeping for study. So we're working on that top tier 7 custom web applications. That's basically, what I like to think of this as is when we're talking about the web apps, we're talking about the thing that customers and users touch the most. So usually we're going to get a lot more complaints, and we're going to usually see things break more quickly because end users will scream about it a lot faster than some of the other stack when there's an issue. Okay. So OWASP top 10 application security risks from 2021. Broken access control, cryptographic failures, injection, insecure design, security misconfiguration, vulnerable and outdated components, identification and authentication failures, software and data integrity failures, security logging and monitoring failures, and server-side request forgery. Broken access controls. So when they're talking about access controls, they're talking about how a web application grants access to the content and function for some privileged users and restricts others. Broken access control is a method in which the attacker identifies a flaw related to access control and it bypasses authentication, which allows them to compromise the network. Allows the attacker to act as users or administrators with privileged functions and creates access, update, or delete every record. Usually what they try to do is, this is where you see those, a lot of times they'll go in as a user and try to escalate to an administrator with these types of attacks.
Quick question.
Yes.
So I know, especially the ones out of China, but a lot of applications that are coming onto the market are designed with failures. Would that still count under this umbrella?
For broken access control?
Or, well, just security risks in general?
A lot of them have multiples, but if the access control section is broken, then yes, it would still be broken access control.
Okay, thanks.
Cryptographic failures or sensitive data exposure. Many web apps do not properly protect their sensitive data from unauthorized users. Sensitive data exposure occurs due to flaws like insecure cryptographic storage and information leakage. When an application uses poorly written encryption codes to securely encrypt and store sensitive data in the database, an attacker can exploit this flaw and steal or modify weakly protected sensitive data, such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, and other authentication credentials. Injection flaws, and then you can see there's a big old thing under here for different types. Injection flaws are web application vulnerabilities that allow untrusted data to be interpreted and executed as part of a command or a query. Attackers exploit injection flaws by constructing malicious commands or queries that result in data loss or corruption, lack of accountability, or denial of access. Injection flaws are prevalent in legacy code, often found in SQL, LDAP, XPath queries, and so on, and can easily be discovered by application vulnerability scanners and fuzzers. So SQL injection, we've talked about a lot. This one involves injecting malicious SQL queries into user input forms. Command injection, this one involves the injection of malicious code through web apps. LDAP involves the injection of malicious LDAP statements. And then there's cross-site scripting, which involves the injection and execution of malicious scripts in your web browser. Now, we have gone over and over these. So if you want some nice files that show you more stuff on it, you can go back and look at these. But rather than just redo everything that we've done, I'm just going to slide down to these next ones. And we're going to talk about insecure design. So insecure design flaws arise in an application because of improper implementation of security controls and can lead to crucial vulnerabilities such as SQLI and Open S3 buckets. So I don't know if any of you saw those, but there were several instances with, specifically, they were Amazon servers. Have you guys seen? I mean, there's tons of articles on where they have the security, something happens, and then all of a sudden they have a database out there that's got stuff in there. That is kind of some of those can be a combination of the, where is that? Sensitive data exposure and insecure design. So just keep that in mind. Attackers initiate the threat modeling of an application's working process to identify a wide range of flaws and loopholes before exploiting the insecure design or architecture. And then there's this nice little thing down here that walks you through all the steps. Security misconfiguration. Always an ever popular favorite. By exploiting misconfiguration vulnerabilities such as unvalidated inputs, parameter or form tampering, improper error handling, insufficient transport layer protection, attackers gain unauthorized access to default accounts, read unused pages, read write unprotected files and directories, etc. Security misconfiguration can occur at any level of an application stack, including platform, web server, application server, framework, and custom code. So, start at the top here. Unvalidated inputs. This refers to a web application vulnerability in which the input from a client is not validated before being processed by web applications and backend servers. Parameters / form tampering involves the manipulation of parameters exchanged between the client and server to modify application data. Improper error handling, we've talked about this a couple of times in web pages. When it's an application, it provides insight into source code, such as logic flaws and default accounts. Using information received from an error message, an attacker identifies vulnerabilities to launch various web application attacks. Insufficient transport layer protection. It supports weak algorithms and uses expired or invalid certificates. Using insufficient transport layer protection exposes user data to untrusted third parties and can lead to account theft. Improper restriction of XXE. It discloses internal files using the file URI handler, internal SMB file shares, or unpatched Windows servers, internal port scanning, remote code execution, and DOS attacks. XML, apparently I can't do the XX stuff. XML eternal entity, or XXE, is a server-side request forgery attack that can occur when a misconfigured XML parser allows an application to parse XML input from an unreliable source. Attackers can refer a victim's web application to an external entity by including the reference in the malicious XLM input. When this malicious input is processed by the weakly configured XML parser of a target web application, it enables the attacker to access protected files and services from the servers or connected network. Vulnerable and outdated components, or using components with known vulnerabilities. And this seems like something that you would, people would not do, but I've seen it happen quite a bit. Sometimes it's the IT department has said, hey, we really shouldn't be using this. But then they say, oh, we can't afford to change it. And, you kind of get stuck using it. So things like that have happened. Most web apps that use components like libraries and frameworks always execute them with full privileges, and flaws in any component can result in serious impact. Attackers can identify weak components or dependencies by scanning or by performing manual analysis. Attackers search for any vulnerabilities on exploit sites such as Exploit Database and CSEC. If a vulnerable component is identified, the attacker customizes the exploit as required and executes the attack. Successful exploitation allows the attacker to cause serious data loss or possibly take full control of the servers. Identification and authentication failure or broken authentication. Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in identification, authentication, and session management function, such as exposed accounts, session IDs, logout password management, timeouts, remember me, secret questions, and account update to impersonate users. So with session IDs and URLs, Remember how we talked about that way you can end up like accidentally bookmarking some of this stuff. Then there's also the attacker can sniff the network traffic or trick the user to get the session ID and then reuse them. Password exploitation, the attacker can gain access to the web app's password database. If the user's passwords are not encrypted, then the attacker can exploit anybody in that database's password. And then the timeout exploitation. If an application's timeouts are not set properly and the user closes their browser without logging out from sites accessed through a public computer, an attacker can use the same browser later and exploit that privilege. Software and data integrity failures. Software and data integrity failures occur when organizations fail to update. Sorry, I have a cat trying to stand on me. That's enough. The application software and latest versions or patches. Web applications rely on plugins, dependencies, libraries, or packages that can be installed from public repositories, content networks, or untrusted sources, which make them vulnerable to attacks. So really, just like anything else, make sure you know what you're installing. Common security weaknesses in this category include functionality from an untrusted control sphere, download of code without integrity test, and the deserialization of untrusted data. Security logging and monitoring failures or insufficient logging and monitoring. So we've talked a little bit about this and some other stuff. So this should sound familiar. Web applications maintain logs and track usage patterns such as users and admin credential logins. Security logging and monitoring failures cover application weaknesses such as insufficient logging, improper output neutralization for logs, exclusion of security relevant information, and addition of sensitive information to log files. Insufficient logging and monitoring refers to a scenario where the detection software either does not record malicious events or it just ignores them altogether, or it ignores important details. Attackers usually inject, delete, or tamper with the web application logs to engage in malicious activity or to hide their activities or their identities. Okay, server-side request forgery. The attacker exploits SSRF vulnerabilities in a public web server to send crafted requests to the internal or backend server. Once the attack is successful, the attackers can perform various activities like port scanning, network scanning, IP address discovery, reading web server files, and bypassing host-based authentication. And this is just some examples of how to do that. Now, you're gonna see there's a whole bunch of, there's over 100 slides for this one. But this is kind of an information overload because a lot of it is stuff that we have seen already. So I'm going to hit a lot of the ones that are more popular and that you're going to run into more often. Directory traversal. No, the lecture's not over, but very funny. Directory traversal, this one allows attackers to access restricted directories, including application source code, configuration, and critical system files to execute commands outside the web server's root application directory. They can manipulate variables, the reference, the files. You remember us talking about .. That should look familiar. And then they can do all sorts of other things, and they just basically they move around within the directories to get there. Yep. There's unvalidated redirects and forwards. Now this one is actually one of my personal favorites because of some of the really interesting things I've seen that happened with this one. Did I tell you guys about the watering hole attack that was done in Washington, D.C. against, I believe it was a law firm on their, okay. So it was really, really slick. So a watering hole attack, your attacker watches your target company or individual for places they go frequently, like websites they go to a lot. And it's if they were, you know, it's kind of like the reason they named it that is because in the wild they have the watering holes where all the animals gather, that type of thing. It's the same thing, only just you know, a bunch of people gathering from a company at a particular website. Well, this attacker figured out that every, I don't know which day of the week, like let's say Wednesdays, since Wednesday, every Wednesday, this particular law firm would order in from a specific restaurant, and they used their online menu. Yeah, I was gonna say it does sound familiar. Okay, so anyway, this is what they did, and it's a watering hole attack. What they did was they infected that menu site. So all of these lawyers went out for their weekly, you know, lunch hit and hit this malicious website, and it affected all their computers. And it was, yeah, I was right. Taco Tuesday. No, it's not. Oh, I don't think it was Taco Tuesday, but yeah. Yeah, it was pretty slick. So they figured out they spend enough time on their you know their web attitudes and to figure it out. They just basically set up this trap, and people just walk right into it. So it's quite impressive. I know that I know that they I can't remember the type of attack that they managed to perpetrate after it, but they got something like 15 high-level access accounts, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. So, and all it was infecting a menu website, you know. I mean, this was before DoorDash, so yeah, if you think about it, now it's like, you know, you go through places like DoorDash or Uber Eats and you have to deal with all of the encryption for those websites. But this was before that, and it was just a generic menu site that didn't have any of that stuff. So, okay, that's a watering hole attack. We've talked about this one over and over again, cross-site request forgery attack, cookie or session poisoning. So this one, cookies are used to maintain a session state in otherwise stateless HTTP protocol. Cookie poisoning attack involves modifying the contents of a cookie, which is the personal information stored on the web user's computer, and you use that then to bypass security mechanisms. Or you can inject malicious code into it. And then you can also do the similar thing when you're doing session rewriting and poisoning as well. So web service attacks. This one, I love this here because it gives you each particular types of layers and what they have. So this one's a nice one if you're not sure what layer goes where. And then what it's attached to. So this one's really nice. And it also tells you the different types of like attack vectors for those. Like there's your SOAP over here. You have buffer overflow, XML parsing, spoiling schema, complex or recursive payloads, DOS or large payloads. Those are possibilities with that. So it's kind of a nice thing if you don't know what you're working with and you're worried about what types of things can be done to that. You have this nice little graphic for it. Web service footprinting. So basically this one, the attacker just footprints the web application to get information on it, which is, you know, you can get all sorts of information. XML poisoning. hidden field manipulation. So when they're talking about hidden field manipulation, a lot of times, do you remember us talking about those get and post prompts when we did HTTP? Well, those are technically hidden fields. And if you can figure out where those are, you can collect them on certain things, or you can examine it and change the hidden fields so that you can change the post request to the server. And sometimes in doing that, you can get all sorts of information about the web app, the servers, and there's all sorts of things you can get. Web-based timing attack. We've talked about this one quite a bit. These are the different types of that. Now, a MarioNet, we haven't talked about before. MarioNet is a browser-based attack that runs malicious code inside the browser, and infection persists even after closing the browser away from the malicious web page through which the infection has spread. So the attacker registers and activate a service worker API through a website controlled by the attacker. Then the victim browses to a website, service worker automatically activates and can run persistently in the background. And then they use it for things like botnets and stuff because they're sitting out there in the background still chugging along. Clickjacking. Now this one, you guys should be familiar with because I guarantee you've all seen this. Attacker performs clickjacking by tricking the victim into clicking on any malicious web page element. That's literally all it is. They are tricking people into clicking on what they want them to click on. So DNS rebinding, we talked about too. This one is basically bypassing the same origin policy security constraints, which allowing the malicious web page to communicate or make arbitrary requests to local domains. And this one has a nice little graphic on the back and forth. Same site attack, also called a related domain attack, occurs when the attacker targets a subdomain of a trusted organization and attempts to redirect the user to an attacker-controlled web page. Familiar domains like edu, com, and org contain several perimeters that make it easy for attackers to capture unused or misconfigured subdomains sharing legitimate sites' top domains. These TLDs help attackers in hijacking legitimate website to create dangling records using the extended TLDs. Okay, so on this, I'm just going to walk you through really quickly. Browse for a website, hijack subdomain. User redirected to a dangling website. Sounds like dangling participle. And then they steal the user data. And then we have pass the cookie attack, which allows attackers to access the user's web servers without providing an identity or performing MFA. The attack occurs when the attackers obtain a clone of the cookie from the user's browser and use it to establish their session. Okay. So next on our journey, explain web application hacking methodology. This is the basics on the different types of hacking. We have footprinting web infrastructure, and you should see this mirror the server stuff, analyzing web application, bypassing client-side controls, attack authentication mechanisms, attack authorization. Sorry, I'm like authoritarian. I can tell I've been watching too much politics on TV. Attack authorization schemes, attack access controls, attack session management mechanisms, perform injection attacks, attack application logic flaws, attack shared environments, attack database connectivity, attack web app client, attack web services. Okay. So, footprinting web infrastructure. So we've talked about footprinting quite a bit. This is that When you footprint this, you want to discover the physical servers and host web application. And then there's different steps within here for footprinting. So you can go back and read through these super detailed ones on here, but the basics for these are right here. So server discovery, discover the physical server and the host web applications. That basically means you discover the physical server and then see if the stuff is online. Service discovery, discover the services running on web servers that can be exploited as attack paths for web apps hacking. And that's also like you're discovering your web ports and things that are open. Server identification, grab server banners to identify the make and version of the web server software. Hidden content discovery, extract content and functionality that is not directly linked or reachable from the main visible content. Load balancer detection, detect load balancers along with their real IP addresses. Then we have analyze web applications, identify entry points for user input, identify server-side technologies, identify server-side functionality, identify files and directory, identify web application vulnerability, map the attack surface. Now, why do you think identify server-side technology and identify server-side functionality, why do you think those are different? Somebody, I'm going to start randomly calling on people.
Security falls under technology instead of functionality. Like there's difference between security. So trying to identify the security versus just different directories.
So on the server-side technology versus functionality, was on that one, what I was looking for is that the technologies and the functionalities. Technology is more the like the hardware and the everything that's installed, and then the functionality is really what you're looking for is what the clients are going to do with it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It seems like it seems simple, but when you first look at it, but when you're like, oh, wait a minute, they're actually talking about slightly different things. But yeah, basically just remember functionality is all about what the end user is going to be using it for. Bypassing client-side controls. So we attack hidden form fields, attack browser extensions, perform source code review, and evade cross-site scripting filters. Attack authentication mechanisms. So there's a bunch of different ones here. We have usernames, cookies, passwords, sessions, and just, like SAML and SSO authentication. And then there's schemes. So we have mechanisms versus schemes. So schemes to access web application using an account or low privileges, then escalate privileges to access protected resources. Manipulate the HTTP request to subvert the application authorization schemes by modifying input fields that relate to user ID, username, access group, cost, etc. Uniform resource identifier, post data, query strings and cookies, parameter tampering, HTTP headers, and hidden tags can all be used to get around that. Attack access controls. So walk through a website to identify access control details of your application. Individual access to a particular subset of data, levels of access granted. It's surprisingly easy when you're using a web app to figure out the types of usernames, the more of them you look through. Admin functionality for configuring and monitoring, functionalities that allow escalation of privileges. So that lets you know basically what types of things you need to hit for. And then access control attack methods, attack with different user accounts, attack multi-stage processes, attack static resources, attack direct access methods, attack restrictions on HTTP methods. And then you can also exploit insecure access controls. Attack session management mechanisms. So attackers break an application session management mechanism to bypass the authentication controls and impersonate privileged application users. You can do session token generation with session token prediction or tampering, and then session token handling with man in the middle, session replay, and session hijacking. Then we have injection input validation attacks. So these, we supply crafted malicious input that is syntactically correct according to the interpreted language being used to break the application's normal intended use. Web script injection, OS commands injections, SQL injection, SMTP injection, LDAP, XPath, buffer overflows, file injections. There's all sorts of things that you can inject if the inputs are not sanitized correctly. Attack application logic flaws. Most application flaws occur due to the negligence and false assumptions of web developers. Completely examine the web application to identify logic flaws for exploitation. And then you can use tools like Burp Suite to manipulate the requests to the web application. This one explains through retail web application logic flaw exploitation scenario. Normal user completing ordering process when it's done sequentially. And then the attacker identifies the application logic flaw and skips proceed to pay stage by manipulating the requests in the application. So if they think, oh, logically that this is how the user should do things, and they don't force the user to do things that way, you can get around the logical flow if you don't have the correct like if-then type programming. It's actually, it's pretty easy to break those if you have people that are good at nonlinear thinking. And that's why it's always good to have people to check your programming, because if you have a couple of friends that are really good at creative thinking or nonlinear thinking, or people like my dad who will pop out the answers and then work backwards to solve math problems, which has always frustrated the tar out of me. And I'm like, I have no idea how you do this. But he's like, I don't know how you do math the regular way. This is how I do it. So the people like that are really good because they always mess up the logical flow of things and can find the problems where people are going to mess it up. Attack shared environments. Organizations leverage third-party service providers for hosting and maintaining their web applications and relevant web infrastructure. For example, a malicious client of a service provider may try to compromise the security of another organization's web app, or client may deploy vulnerable web app that exposes and compromises the web applications of another organization. Then you can do things that are attacks on the access mechanism, or attacks between different applications. Yeah, no, it's when it comes to math, I have no idea how he does it. Part of it is they didn't know he was dyslexic for years. He was born in a time when there were still some people out there that believed that being left-handed was a sign of the devil, and he got one of those as an early teacher. So he was left-handed and they forced him to be right-handed. So he had all sorts of problems that ended up. So he looks at the problem, figures it out in his head really quickly, writes down the answer, and then works backwards to show his work. And it's really an odd thing to watch, but it always comes out right, so I can't argue with him about it. And he's, you know, he's really good with numbers, because, you know, he has dyslexia when it comes to letters, so numbers make more sense to him. So you never know, that's why you got to have lots of people that you talk to when it comes to things, because there's always that one person out there that's gonna think completely differently and gonna break things. And that's actually the perfect type of person to have break stuff for you so you can fix it. Attack database connectivity. So database connection strings are used to connect applications to database engines. So we didn't really talk about this in our SQL class, the other class, because we weren't dealing with SQL Server. But a lot of times when you're doing, you know how I talked about, you create the database and then set it to do like use database, blah, blah, blah. Well, when you're using a default database that goes out to a SQL Server database, you have a string like this. And I've seen ones like this where they actually put the user password in plain text in the string in the web coding. And it makes me hurt when I think about it, but I have seen it out there. So be aware that there are issues like this where the whole thing can be fine, but then someone can take 2 lines of code to make a shortcut, and they can put this huge security flaw right in the middle of it. So this is an example of what's called a connection string. And you can attack connection strings in order to get information on what server you're going to, and all sorts of things. And you can do things like a connection pull DOS attack on that. You can do attack of the web app client. And this has basically the same stuff that we've talked about, because it uses the same type of inputs. So we have our cross-site scripting, injection, request forgery, privacy, redirects, frame injection, session fixation, ActiveX attacks, things like that. Attack web services. So web services work on top of legacy web applications, and any attack on a web service immediately exposes underlying applications, business and logic vulnerabilities for various attacks. So, and the nice thing about this one here, again, you can see the different types of areas, like there's SOAP, there's WSDL, and some database things will give you ideas of where those will happen. So what are the tools that people can use for this? So we've talked about Metasploit, but here's a nice list of some other ones. There's an XSS scanner, which is a pen testing tool. There's an SQL injection scanner. There's a whole bunch of really cool ones here that you can use. Okay. What is a web API? So this is an application programming interface that provides online web services to client-side apps for retrieving and uploading data from multiple online sources. Using a centralized web API reduces the complexity and increases the integrity of updating and changing the data or business logic at one central location. So here's a list of our different web service APIs. What are webhooks? Now, we kind of have talked about this a little bit, but here's a better in-depth one. Webhooks are user-defined HTTP callbacks or push APIs that are raised based on events triggered, such as receiving a comment on a post or pushing a code to the registry. They allow applications to update other applications with latest information. They are enrolled along with domain registration via user interface or API to inform clients about occurrence of a new event. All right, and here is our top 10 API security risks. Broken object level authorization, broken user authentication, excessive data exposure, lack of resources and rate limiting, broken function level authorization, mass assignment, security misconfiguration, injection, improper assets management, and insufficient logging and monitoring. So what are the top business, or what are the 8 business vulnerabilities, API vulnerabilities? Enumerated resources, sharing resources via unsigned URLs, vulnerabilities in third-party libraries, improper use of cores, and that's your mechanism that enables web browsers to perform cross-domain requests, code injections, RBAC privilege escalation, no ABAC validation, and business logic flaws. This is your web API hacking methodology. Just remember to identify the target, detect security standards, identify attack surface, and launch attacks. Okay, we're on the last section here. So, hold on one second. Let me see how many we have. So web application security testing, there are a whole bunch of different things that you can do for testing on these, which just like code testing, which we've talked about, manual web app security testing, that's your static testing. Then we have automated web app security testing. Then we have static application security testing and dynamic application security testing. Web application fuzz testing or fuzzing. That's our black box text testing, which we quality check and assurance technique. We do things like finding code errors and loopholes and things like that. You can get tons of random data, which is why they call it fuzzing, because it's just random. And you generate it with these fuzzing tools or fuzzers, and you use it against your web app and see what you can do to get it to, basically, you just try to see if you can break it. So we've talked about source code review. We have the manual and automated review. There's URL and HTML encoding. And then there's Unicode, base64, and hex code. And you can just literally see little pieces of what those are right there. Whitelisting and blacklisting. So whitelisting basically is just giving you a list that says, usually there's actually a combination technique that people use now with this, because it used to be one or the other. One would be, okay, here are the applications that you can use, and anything else not on this whitelist of applications you can't use. Whereas the other place for the blacklisting would be, they just put in a list of everything that was bad that you weren't allowed to use. Well, whitelisting was a lot easier than saying everything that was bad. And then people realized, we can kind of do a gray. It's kind of like a white hat, black hat, gray hat. Well, we can use the gray and we can use a little bit of both of those so that we can catch all of the really bad stuff. But we can also whitelist stuff that we know is perfectly okay. And we have some defense against the attacks for injection. It really just depends on which type of injection attack they're going to get you with. As you can see, there are like 3 different pages here on the different attempts for injection. Then there are web application attack countermeasures that you can use, like make sure you fix your broken access controls and things like that. So I'm just going to click through these so you can see them. And don't forget, all of these are available for download. This is a nice, how do you defend against web application attacks? RASP for protecting web servers, run application self-protection. This one provides security to web and non-web applications running on a server, can detect runtime attacks, and real-time software application layer can provide better visibility of the hidden vulnerability and incoming traffic. They can perform continuous monitoring, which is nice, and it helps in remediating attacks in the early stages and generates minimized false positives. So, and we've also talked about bug bounty programs. They're awesome. Here are some security testing tools. And Metasploit also has stuff for testing. And lastly, web application firewalls. These are literally just an application based firewall to help with these things like SQL injection and things like that. Okay, so this one was a nice and long one. So what did we go over in this one? Web application concepts, web application attacks, hacking methodology for web apps, which covered footprinting, web infrastructure, analyzing web applications, bypassing client-side controls, etc. Various web application hacking tools, web APIs, webhooks, and web shells. Hacking web applications via APIs, webhooks, and web shells. Various countermeasures, and securing web apps using different security tools. Okay, so let me stop share on this. And I'm going to stop recording, but then we will have a quiz, so don't run away.